Number 10. Gold tongues. 140 miles south of Cairo is El Banasa. Archaeologists just found 2 sealed tombs containing the remains of a mystery man and a mystery woman, and an array of clues and, of course, treasures. The sealed tomb and sarcophagi, made of limestone, included scarab amulets, 4 canopic mummy jars, and more than 400 pieces of pottery and funerary figurines. Yeah, like little guys. The mummy's face was also so well preserved with a perfectly shiny golden tongue still inside his mouth. Ooh, ouch. They just like dip that in, or they cut that off and kind of replace it. How's that work? Guy's gonna have a hard time with his L's. The team stumbled upon 3 golden tongues actually, and archaeologists working in the Alexandria also discovered gold tongue mummies dating to about 2,000 years ago. Talk about an expensive sentence, huh? Number 9. Ginger. As always, if you like what we do here on Bumblebee, throw us a like button, why don't you? Or comment down below. Which one of these creep you out the most? The golden tongues? Dude, it's already got me. The Gibellian pre-dynastic mummies are 6 naturally mummified bodies dating to approximately 3400 BCE, or from the late pre-dynastic period of ancient Egypt. Since 1901, the first body excavated has remained on display in the British Museum. The body, of course, was originally nicknamed Ginger due to its very well-preserved, healthy, shiny red hair. This nickname is no longer officially used, of course, because these are people we're talking about here. After the Human Tissue Act of 2004, the British Museum developed policies for proper treatment of human remains and no longer used nicknames. Yeah, that would have been nice, wouldn't it? Just finding bones making jokes. Yes, look, Limbs McGee. I'll write that down. I'll write that down in here as the official. These 6 were excavated at the end of the 19th century by Wallace Budge and are the first complete, fully intact pre-dynastic bodies ever discovered to this day. Spooky. Number 8. King Tut. We can't just blow by this list without the scariest event of all. The tomb of Tutankhamun was discovered in 1922 in the Valley of the Kings, led by Egyptologist Howard Carter. Tut's tomb was hidden by debris, luckily, therefore it never got looted throughout the centuries. More than 5,000 objects were found, including the infamous King Tut himself. Egypt, now part of the British rule, gave a feeling of national pride back then, strengthening Pharaohism and gluing Egypt's ties to this now ancient world. The publicity surrounding the excavation intensified when one of the founders actually died of an infection, giving rise to the infamous cursed tomb. But then a couple of other discoverers just started dropping dead and everyone was like, oh yeah, so that's what cursed means, huh? It says do not open right here. I see that now. Gotcha.
Number 7. A strange resting place. Ancient burial grounds. Okay, these tombs, they come in many different shapes and sizes. Some can be these massive Great Pyramids, and others can be a shallow cave system. Sometimes there's ancient history right below your feet, and you'd never know. In St. Augustine, for example, the remains of a donkey were found buried underground. And judging from the skull and the bones and the placement, something was afoot here. It had clearly been hunted down by humans and placed there purposefully. That's not the mysterious part at all. The mysterious part is that all the bones have been carefully separated and there's no marks to suggest that any tools were used. So researchers believe that this thing wasn't even used for food. So what was it? The limbs were placed to point north and south. That's it. They used this donkey as a compass. How rude is that? What? Donkeys in that area of Florida in the 17th century, that's not bizarre at all. But the way the bones were buried, you know, north and south, that's very odd. That's very Game of Thronesy. Know what I'm saying? What's the message here? What's the point? What's the point? Besides north and south, of course. Number 6, tortoise tomb. Okay, somebody called Mario. We got a lot of shells to explain. Okay, pal? Back in 2005 in northern Israel, a tomb of a shaman, who we believe was a 45-year-old woman at the time of her passing, was found in a cave. It was a cave/tomb. Like I said, many different shapes and sizes. There were 28 other skeletons as well, and it appears they had a 6-stage burial. There were beautiful decorations to suggest such, but something that really stood out here were the 86 tortoise bodies discovered in the corner of the tomb. What's going on here? What did we miss? I have FOMO, but I'm not sure why. Was this an ancient feast or a long-lost sacrifice? Either way, poor guys. Number 5, necklace from Egyptian afterlife. We're all curious what happens after you die, right? But nobody celebrates the end of your days like the ancient Egyptians. They go hard. They really go for it. Like I mentioned earlier, they would paint doors, leave valuables. Any new tomb we discover has thousands of artifacts, hints rather to what lies beyond. An ancient necropolis was discovered only a few years ago in, of course, Egypt, and it contains dozens of coffins and a necklace that holds a message from the afterlife. Okay, now we're talking. This site is around 2,000 years old and they're in the process of excavating it right now as we speak. But so far the tombs and artifacts found belong to an ancient priestess. Nice. A message from the afterlife is pretty spectacular. We want that, we want that. Don't let Rose from Titanic near that one, or else. You know what she'll do with the necklace. You know what she likes doing. Number 4, bone compass. Okay, just because we've been talking about graves does not mean these messages or anything have to be written or drawn. Sometimes it can be as simple as leaving animal bones on the ground. Yeah, that ought to speak for itself more than any art. If you see that, you're on your way. I'm not gonna be grave robbing if there's a big old pile of bones oddly placed. What do you guys like, White Walkers, Game of Thrones? What is this? This is terrifying. In St. Augustine, for example, the remains of a donkey were found buried underground. Judging from the skull, it had been clearly hunted down by humans at the time. That's not the weird part here. The weird part is that all these bones have been carefully separated. There's no marks to suggest that any tools were used, so gross, for one, but researchers believe that this wasn't even used for food. The limbs were placed to point north and south. They used this donkey as a compass. How rude is that? Donkeys in the area of Florida in the 17th century, that's not bizarre at all. But the way these bones were laid out, something's afoot here. What's the message here? I mean, obviously besides that way's north. Is there any other message if that? Or were people just bored back in the day? Number 3, mythical carvings. Back in 2014, a 17-year-old cemetery was discovered along the Silk Road, which are these ancient trade roads, ancient highways rather, connecting China and the Roman Empire. In the city of Kucha, now northwest China, this cemetery was found along with 10 ancient tombs, one of which was referred to as M3. All these tombs get their cool nicknames like KB55, that's pretty good. M3, short. Sounds very British. M3, sounds like a British secret agent. M3 didn't have any haunting messages this time around, but it did contain several carvings of mythical creatures. Some creatures that don't even exist. There's a white tiger of the west, the black turtle of the north, the vermilion bird of the south, so far so recognizable, and then there's the azure dragon of the east. Could this mean that dragons are very real? Were very real? Are? I vote R. Please be real. These mythical carvings represent different seasons in the heavens, but what could the other 6 carvings even mean? Maybe the depictions of hell? Number 2, chalk drum. Deemed one of the most important pieces of prehistoric art, this chalk drum is 5,000 years old. It was first discovered by archaeologists in England back in 2018. It was found with the remains of 3 humans. It was featured in the World of Stonehenge exhibition. It sounds like an instrument, but really this chalk drum was used as an art piece. Almost like all of our drum sets from when we grew up. I'm like, oh, we don't actually play that, it's just for show. Yeah, I can't do anything on it. That guitar too, can't play that, just for show. Maybe time of your life if you're lucky, on a good day, but for the most part, for show. British Museum project curator recalls the findings as remarkable, of course. This was the artistic language throughout the British Isles 5,000 years ago. Radiocarbon dates back to 2890 BC, around the same time of the construction of Stonehenge. So yeah, pretty old. A chalk ball and bone pin were also found at the site, so again, pretty loaded discovery. And finally, coming in at number 1, Celtic warrior shield. This one was referred to as the most important British Celtic art object of the millennium, which not a bad title at all. An Iron Age chariot burial was discovered in Yorkshire a few years ago, and researchers were excavating a house development originally in Pocklington, and then they find a soldier's tomb. Nice. Also, what's the asking price? The soldier was laid on a chariot with a Celtic shield over top. The shield was dated back to 175 BC. See, most Iron Age shields up until this point didn't have scalloped edges, but this one did. Yeah, we thought metal shields were used only for ceremonies, but this one has been repaired. There are clear sword marks. It had been used many a times in battles. My arm gets tired in class if I raise it for too long, you know? I have to like do the old switcheroo or like hold it up, one of these. This guy was holding a metal shield up all day long. Are you kidding me? I'm gonna go do 1,000 push-ups now and fix that light that I moved when I did that hand bit. Starting our list off at number 10, Newgrange. Heading over to the beautiful Ireland, kicking off this list. Newgrange is this massive circular tomb. It's an ancient mound, really, protruding from the earth. It's quite hard to miss. Now the tomb is roughly 5,200 years old, meaning that this passage tomb in the Boyne Valley is older than Stonehenge and older than the Great Pyramids of Giza. That's pretty incredible. Stone Age farmers built this mound somehow, and is 85 meters in diameter and 13 meters high. Again, quite massive, hard to miss. A tomb that takes up an acre of space. Must be nice. Now the passage and main chamber just happen to align with the rising sun on the mornings around the winter solstice. And if that's not fancy enough for you, the tomb is surrounded in a ring of large curbstones. There's actually 97 curbstones that surround Newgrange in total, and some of these are engraved with megalithic art. There's probably one that says Todd was here. Most likely. Number 9. The animal tombs. This tomb was found, of course, as you guessed, in the Valley of the Kings, but the name of the tomb is a number. What in the Elon Musk is happening? Who names their tomb a number? What? KV52, that's the official name, and it was discovered in 1906 by Edward Ayrton. Tomb KV50, KV51, and of course this one, KV52, they all together form a group referred to as the animal tombs. Hidden underneath 6 feet of debris this entire time, the entrance to KV52 was finally found. So when we enter a tomb that had been untouched ideally for thousands of years, we could find anything, right? In fact, whatever they do find is a win. It helps complete this age-long puzzle of humans' history. So when officials opened KV52 and it was pretty much empty, yeah, that doesn't feel too nice. All this time, really? It's empty? There's no treasure? Are we sure? Empty except for 2 boxes, both black and undecorated, which is a little ominous. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a canopic chest that had 4 compartments. Number 8. Luxor Tomb. We've been saying 2,500 years ago quite often when we refer to these tombs, and don't get me wrong, that's an awful long time. But in 2014, archaeologists discovered a 4,000-year-old tomb from the 11th dynasty. It was tucked away in Luxor, Egypt this whole time. We've missed it for so long. Spanish archaeologists found a tomb belonging to a leader from the 11th dynasty. Now, it's pretty obvious that this was somebody from the royal family or somebody who was a high-ranking official of some sorts, because Luxor was the capital city of ancient Egypt at the time, and given how this tomb looked when we found it, yeah, they were pretty important. Officials believed that the tomb could have been used as a mass grave due to the large amounts of human remains found inside. Now, it's important to note that this tomb had also been used during the 17th dynasty because tools and utensils from that time, which was way later on, was found in the same tomb. Yeah, we're gonna find a spork in that tomb in 5,000 years and be like, oh yes, more ancient tools. Number 7. Ancient curse. When officials found the tomb of Ankh-Mahor, aka a pharaoh official from 4,000 years ago, they also happened to find a curse. Yeah, for real, this one was written on the wall, right there. That's how you know that you're screwed. Buried in Mastaba, an above-ground massive tomb held this warning. It reads, "Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property." And it also warns of Ankh-Mahor's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and it threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing ghosts. So if you enter this tomb, you magic, you might see some ghosts, I don't know, I'd be out of there comedically fast. You would read that and then look down and my shoes would be left there, that's it. I would be gone, my shoes would be left. Like a cartoon. Number 6. Celtic warrior shield. Now this one was referred to as the most important British Celtic art object of the millennium, so yeah, not a bad title, I guess. That's pretty cool. An ancient Iron Age chariot burial was discovered in Yorkshire a few years ago, and our researchers were actually excavating a house development in Pocklington. They didn't mean to find this, but then all of a sudden they find a soldier's tomb, and they're like, all right, I guess that's lunch. Are we rich? I don't know. The soldier was laid on a chariot. It was beautiful, but he had a Celtic shield laid over top. Now this shield was also dated back to 175 BC. A lot of history, lots to unpack here in an accidental tomb finding. First of all, most Iron Age shields up until this point didn't have a scalloped edge, but for some reason this one here did. We thought metal shields were only used for ceremony, but this one's been used in combat. It's been repaired and then used again, it seems. There are clear sword marks around the shield, each that tell a story. Yeah, let's just go poke around a Celtic warrior's tomb. What could possibly go wrong?
A Grecian cemetery holds terrible secrets at the bottom of a well. The Karmikos cemetery dates all the way back to the Bronze Age, so around 2700 BCE. It was first excavated by archaeologists in 1870, and since 1930 excavations have continued and thousands of tombs uncovered. As you can imagine, through years of excavations, lots of messed up things have been discovered in said tombs. Weird bodies, weird deaths, buried alive, and now in 2020, a collection of 30 inscribed lead tablets were found at the bottom of a well that's 2,500 years old. Which sounds creepy enough as is, but the tablets each bear individual curses and prayers to Greek gods of the underworld. AKA it's like Grecian culty Satanism stuff, as well as the fact that the well was poisoned and in the middle of a tomb yard. Jutta Strokozek, who led the excavation, said that whoever ordered the curses inscribed on the tablets was unnamed, but the black magic is present and there for all to see, even if forbidden in Greece at the time. And while the well was only just found in 2016, as mentioned, the site was first excavated in 1870. But progress halted when World War II broke out, as all members of the excavation team joined the forces, and then every single one died, back to back to back. While it's hard to pin that on the curse itself, it does follow the trend set by King Tut and Casimir. A recent discovery changes the history of the Philippines, the Lost Millennia tombs. Our world still has discoveries to be made, and archaeologists have proven that when they unearthed the remnants of a 1,000-year-old village on a jungle mountaintop in the Philippines. I'd say this is more of a shocking tomb discovery than scary. I'm just excited about this. The game changer is the discovery of limestone coffins, a type that's never been found before in Southeast Asia. This is huge because it's the first indication that Filipinos at the time in history practiced more advanced burial rituals than previously thought, and that they had metal tools to carve these coffins, which we didn't know before. While they're similar to ancient sarcophagi, the tombs differ by being simple, without elaborate decoration or images on the tops or sides. They're just a plain, classy box. And a tooth extracted from one of the skeletons, carbon dated, confirmed they are about 1,000 years old, with 15 graves found in total. Overall, this site is described as a complex archaeological site with both habitation and burial remains from a period of approximately 10th to 14th century. It's the first kind in the Philippines having these limestone advancements. Malani tourism officer Sammy Cortez says after the archaeologists have finished their work, they're gonna open this up as an archaeological site you can visit, the same as the Tut's tomb.
Number 3. Message from Egyptian afterlife. We're all curious what happens after you die, of course, but nobody celebrated the end of your days like ancient Egyptians did, right? It's beautiful. Like I've mentioned before on this channel, they would have these fake painted doors. They would leave valuables. Any new tomb that we discover provides more hints as to what lies beyond, right? An ancient necropolis was discovered only a few years ago, again in Egypt. It contains dozens of coffins and a necklace that holds a message from the afterlife. Okay, now we're talking. This site is around 2,000 years old, and they're in the process of excavating it as we speak, as I mansplain to you about these tombs. But so far the tombs and artifacts found, officials think, belong to an ancient priestess. A message from the afterlife is pretty spectacular, but what does it say exactly? Well, we're still waiting to find out. These things take time, you know? Number 2. Mythical carvings. Back in 2014, a 1,700-year-old cemetery was discovered along the Silk Road, which are these ancient trade routes, ancient highways rather, connecting China and the Roman Empire. Now in the city of Kucha, now in northwest China, the cemetery was found along with 10 ancient tombs, one of which was referred to as M3. M3 didn't have any haunting messages this time around, but it did contain several carvings of mythical creatures. Creatures that were once alive? Question mark. There's the white tiger of the west, the black turtle of the north, the vermilion bird of the south, so far so lovely, and then there's the azure dragon of the east, a little bigger, a little bit more mighty. These mythical carvings represent different seasons and the heavens, but could the other 6 carvings mean depictions of hell? Probably, possibly. And finally, number 1, the Ring of Sekenianis. One ring to rule them all. And by rule, I mean curse you and your entire family. Don't touch this. This is why you don't steal from ancient tombs. Has to be number 1. This 12-gram gold ring, for starters, looks beautiful, and secondly, it's massive. Its diameter was 25 millimeters, so unless you were wearing some sort of infinity gauntlet, she's probably gonna fall off your little Jack Skellington fingers, you know what I mean? The ring had first been found in 1785. A farmer was plowing a field in Silchester Village, a village west of London known for its grim history, because in 45 AD, ancient Romans invaded that site, and come the 7th century, it was completely abandoned. And probably pretty cursed. The ring was mighty and even had an inscription on it, a Latin inscription, of course. It read, Senequian vivas indium. And when 1929 rolled around, new details surfaced, or resurfaced rather. The data from the ring matched an excavation that was done in the early 1900s less than 100 miles away, in a place called Lydney. That's where this ring is from. At the same site, however, a tablet was found recalling the Celtic god of healing and hunting, and how his favorite ring got stolen. I'm connecting some stories here. Uh-oh, I may have stolen something I shouldn't have. If this rings a bell, yes, Lord of the Rings was inspired by this exact legend. The tablet also says, may he who bears the name of Senequianus not have health until he brings the ring back to the Temple of Nodens. Yeah, let's get that ring back ASAP Rocky, that would be great. I'll be a lot quicker than Lord of the Rings. I'll be a lot quicker than 3 movies, I'll tell you that. Where's this temple? I'll put in my Uber right now, I'm on my way.
So let's start off with a bit of a classic to warm us up, the Terracotta Warriors. years. When laborers digging a well in China in 1974 discovered a life-size statue of a soldier, they had no idea how much more lay beneath them. Archaeologists started excavating and today think there are as many of 8,000 of these clay statues. Most are warriors, but there are full-sized horses and chariots as well, also dancers and acrobats. All figures have their own facial expressions and features unique to them. This vast terracotta army testifies the absolute power and great ambitions of the first emperor of China. Qin Shi Huangdi, who is buried in the tomb at the site, hasn't been excavated because of concerns about its stability. But if his burial record is any indicator, there are enough traps inside to make for an effective enough curse, notwithstanding the alleged curse the emperor himself placed on it. After all, it did take 700,000 workers 36 years to build this tomb, and supposedly many of those workers were buried alive inside to keep what's inside there a secret. And it's worked. No one knows what's in there. There's also the matter of the potentially cursed Terracotta Army. According to an interview on Swiss Info with one of the many men who accidentally discovered the emperor's army, there's a widespread belief that these statues were never meant to be seen by other men, and that would bring great misfortune onto the surrounding villages, all because it was a major disruption of the dead emperor's feng shui. While the Chinese government continues to protect the actual tomb, it will remain a mystery what sort of protection the emperor took with himself to the grave. How about a scary discovery and scary consequence? Tamerlane's tomb. As written in Atlas Obscura, Soviet scientist Mikhail Gerasimov woke up one day feeling spicy and felt like digging up a horrific conqueror, Tamerlane, to reconstruct his bashed-in face. So, ignoring the outcry of religious leaders, locals, Muslim clergy, literally anyone, these curious yet emotionally stunted anthropologists opened the tomb for the first time since 1941, also ignoring 2 consecutive warnings on the tomb itself not to. The first is in plain sight outside of it: when I rise from the dead, the whole world shall tremble. The second was a surprise hidden within the tomb itself that nobody had opened before these dummies, and it said, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Freaky. So naturally, they cracked the bad boy sarcophagus open. No consequences on the spot means none at all, right? 3 days later, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and invades Russia. Few would argue that the push-broom mustache dictator would qualify as an invader more terrible than Tamerlane. Those that dispute the curse point out that Operation Barbarossa was always planned and subtly underway before the opening of the tomb, which is all well and good, but in 1942, Stalin demanded the return of Tamer to his tomb since the body had been taken. When the body was finally returned and buried with full Islamic rites, the Battle of Stalingrad's advantage shifted, changing the course for the Russians to win. So who knows, right? I think your own sudden imminent death counts as a scary discover. So, if so, King Casimir counts. And 50 years after the mysterious circumstances surrounding King Tut's exhumation, a similar incident occurred in Poland at the tomb of Jagiellon, where the King Casimir rests. Poland was a socialist country at the time of exhumation, so many types of research were restricted. It wasn't easy to receive an agreement to examine historical sites, and it took the Cardinal Archbishop of Krakow to support the researchers, who were just dying to get their hands on the shriveled corpse of the king, and for the final decision to be his to allow the opening of the tomb. Wrong call! Little did they know what they'd stumble upon. Researchers were eager to figure out more after the king's death 500 years ago, and they dug right in. It was worldwide news, as was the curse that the researchers kept joking about that was supposed to take their lives. Unfortunately for them, funny anecdotes become prophecies. As the examination was in process, those involved started to die from strokes and infections. Within the first few days, 4 are dead. Within years, around 15 are dead. Yeah, turns out they discovered deadly mold, the same as in Tut's tomb. As many historians have quietly mumbled about, there's always the possibility that maybe, just maybe, that mold wasn't something that grew over time, but was placed by a clever mixologist.
Number 7. King Tut's artifacts. The new Grand Egyptian Museum was set to open in 2018, and then finally it did come 2021. And while that's quite recent, the contents displayed inside certainly are not. For the first time in history, King Tut's ancient belongings, all of them, all the artifacts discovered with him, will be on display. See, prior to this museum being open, we only saw around 150 artifacts from his tomb. They all took pieces on tour, a big Egyptian mummy tour, you know. There's like Kiss's final reunion tour, then also King Tut's. You're like, oh, who do I see? Ooh. But now this museum, this grand museum, will house thousands of artifacts. That's over 7,000 square meters as well, might I add. What a display this is. If you have a chance to visit the Grand Egyptian Museum, or if you saw this King Tut World Tour, I'm jealous. I'm very jealous. We have one museum in Toronto, but it's, you know. The Egypt section there is. Number 6. Engraved warnings. It's a part 3, so of course we have to include some Paris catacomb creepiness. Yeah, as far as the old tombs go, that one's pretty haunting, I'd say, no? These catacombs date back to the late 1700s. Not so ancient, but give me a break, okay? It's part 3, I'm doing my best. When the city's cemeteries were starting to fill up, and I mean that in a literal sense, officials began moving contents from all over to these abandoned mines. The catacombs were opened officially in 1809. What a fun family excursion that must have been. Nice. That or the wax museum. They're like, let's take the kids this way, let's go this way. They designed the catacombs with the walls of skulls to ensure that visitors would meditate on death. That's the whole vibe. Let's go meditate and think about death for a bit in the walls of skulls. Yeah, I'm sure everybody who visits thinks of nothing else. Pretty confident there. In order to ensure this was the vibe of the room, there's a phrase carved above the entrance, and it translates to, "Stop, this is the empire of the dead." I would be like, okay, no problem. Number 5, Luxor tomb. We've been saying 2,500 years ago, and don't get me wrong, that's an awful long time to go. But in 2014, archaeologists discovered a 4,000-year-old tomb from the 11th dynasty, tucked away in Luxor, Egypt, of course, as this list says. Spanish archaeologists found a tomb belonging to a leader from the 11th dynasty, and it's pretty obvious that this was somebody from the royal family or somebody who was a high-ranking official, because at the time, Luxor was the capital city of ancient Egypt, and officials also believe this tomb could have been used as a mass grave. The important thing to note here is that the tomb had also been used during the 17th dynasty, because tools and utensils from that later time were also found in this grave. We're gonna find a spork in 5,000 years and be like, ah yes, ancient tools, interesting. Number 4, 210 sarcophagi. So we thought it was a pretty big deal when 160 bodies were recently discovered in Egypt. This was back in September 2020. Over 160 coffins were found. Wild, right? Well, those are rookie numbers, turns out. For this one, archaeologists found 210 sarcophagi near Queen Nefertiti's funerary temple in the city of the dead, Sakara. Yeah, there were over 160, surprise. Maybe next time you check in with us, that number will be even higher. Who knows? Hopefully, / maybe hopefully not. I don't know how I feel about this. This was January 2021. We probably would have seen it on the news, but that was when 768 people were storming the Capitol, so the news was a bit busy, I guess. Thanks. These sealed coffins were untouched for thousands of years. They went from finding 160 to finding 210. That's incredible. According to the ministry, the sarcophagi were completely closed and haven't been opened since they were buried at all. They opened a few though, of course, just to analyze and display them, but that's it. Yeah, leave the rest. I'm not focused on ancient curses or Brendan Fraser having to come out and save the day. Just let dead people lay where they are. Let them rest. The amount of effort gone into hiding and preserving their memory alone, I mean, look how long it's taken for us to even find these things. It's almost like they didn't want to be found. Number 3, the ancient curse. The walls of some of these tombs have warnings from the gods, which is a lot. One of them warning trespassers that the gods will wring their neck like that of a goose. Also, if I walked into somebody's property now and it said trespassers' necks will be wrung out like a goose, I would turn back. I wouldn't want to investigate further. I would just walk away. You don't need to be an ancient god to get that message across, you know what I mean? But inside the found tomb of the vizier Ankhamor, a pharaoh's official from 4,000 years ago, a curse was written. Buried in a mastaba, an above-ground massive tomb, was this warning. Might do against this, my tomb, the same shall be done to your property. It also warns of the vizier's knowledge of secret spells and magic, and threatens to fill impure intruders with a fear of seeing a ghost. Yeah, there's that, or beware of dog. I don't know, you can pick which is more impactful on your property, sure. Number 2, the animal tombs. This tomb was found, as you may have guessed, in the Valley of the Kings. You're getting good, nice. But this one doesn't sound like the rest. I mean, for starters, it's a number rather than a name. What in the Elon Musk is happening here? Whose name was a number, huh? KV-52 was discovered in 1906 by Edward Ayrton. Tomb KV-50, KV-51, and this one, KV-52, they all form a group referred to as the animal tombs. Underneath 6 feet of debris, the entrance to these vaults were found, so when we enter this tomb, specifically KV-52, that's been untouched, ideally for thousands of years, we can look forward to finding anything. In fact, whatever we do find, it's a win. It helps complete this age-long puzzle. So when officials opened KV-52 and it was completely empty, well, that doesn't feel too nice. Something here is wrong. It was empty except for 2 boxes. Both were black and undecorated, which is odd considering what we've learned on this list. The larger of the 2 contained the remains of a monkey, and the smaller one was a canopic chest that had 4 compartments in it. Hauntingly bare compared to what else we've seen on this list, but it gets a little better. We're not done yet. Finally, number 1, Queen Nefertiti's hidden chamber. When researchers are 90% sure about something, that's a pretty good sign. You only say you're 90% sure of something when you know for sure. You leave 10% in case anything else goes wrong out of your control, right? 90%, that's confident, we got this. So when Egyptian authorities said they're 90% sure there's a hidden chamber in King Tut's tomb, well, we got a little jazzed. Got some jazz hands going on. Not gold, jazz hands. Back in 2015, a paper was published on the burial of Queen Nefertiti. Archaeologist Nicholas Reeves argued that while conducting scans on the ancient site, Reeves found what resembled traces of doors beneath the plaster. Now, it's been considered previously by archaeologists that King Tut's mask, having ear piercings and all, suggests that at that time, that tomb and that death mask was actually meant for Queen Nefertiti, not King Tut. But because King Tut died suddenly when he was 19, plans had to quickly change. 90% sure is good enough for me. What do you guys think? Comment down below all your thoughts. Kicking off the list at number 10, new tombs. Fresh off the press, folks, Egypt announced only yesterday. Egypt, they announced it, yeah, just all of them as a whole. Egypt announced only yesterday that they have discovered 5 ancient tombs in Sakara. This is fresh news, this is brand new, only a few people know about this. These tombs date back to the time of the Old Kingdom, around 2700 to 2200 BC. So yeah, they're a touch old. The 5 tombs were found northeast of the Pyramid of Menir, a 6th dynasty structure. Now these tombs clearly belonged to a group of people with high value. They were obviously officials. Mustafa al-Waziri, head of Egypt's Supreme Antiquities Council, has since released additional information on who the tombs belong to. How fun is that? That's how fast we're getting to the bottom of this already. This happened like yesterday and we already know who's in the tombs? Okay, great work. The first one belonged to an ancient official named Iri. There's a deep burial shaft that leads down to a chamber filled with funerary decorations, offering tables, the 7 oils. It looked completely untouched. Well, it was. And of course there was also a limestone sarcophagus. Can't have a tomb without a sarcophagus or two. Number 9, Queen Nerit. Just over a year ago, the Ministry of Tourism and Antiquities announced the discovery of Queen Nerit, the wife of one King Teddy. Yeah, here we go, aka the first pharaoh of Egypt's 6th dynasty. They found her burial shaft. There were coffins, of course mummies, artifacts, all dating back to the New Kingdom, meaning the Sakara necropolis was used in the late period, but now apparently it was also used in the New Kingdom as well. That's the news to us. Perhaps the most questionable find was a 4-meter long scroll. That was the 17th chapter of the Book of the Dead. Yeah, nothing like finding a chapter of your favorite book. You're like, where's the rest? Let's find them. It's like a National Treasure movie, only haunting. As well as funerary masks, miniature boats, and 50 coffins. A lot of coffins in this one. Again, this is the first time 3,000-year-old coffins were found in the Sakara necropolis. This is huge. Number 8, mummified lion cub. Back in 2019, Secrets of the Sakara Tomb was released, and honestly, what a weekend that was. That was a good time. I remember that one. If you haven't checked it out, I implore you to do so. Officials discovered a 4,400-year-old tomb that belonged to a man named Wache at the Sakara necropolis. This was pretty close to Cairo, only 30 kilometers away, so you can only imagine this commute ages ago and how beautiful it must have been. This tomb was full of incredible artifacts, mummified animals even. There was a lion cub and over 3,000 ancient artifacts. A lot of stuff, jam-packed this one. When digging up our past, it's tricky because you don't want to ruin any funerary decorations and anything like that and be disrespectful, but you also want to know who these people were. We want to know about our history, what happened, what they stood for before their passing, and why they were so important in the first place. Wache and his family remains were studied, and it appears malaria claimed the lives of him and his entire family. This is also the first mummified cub we've ever found in history, so as far as findings go, this one was jam-packed with history.
Call Guinness World Records because this tomb has the most curses per square foot dead body paradise. Sakara is genuinely called the ancient city of the dead, and you may have heard of it since it's right up there with King Tut for Egyptian burial site hotspots to visit. Its origin traces all the way back to the 1st dynasty, where it hosted burials for more than 3,000 years before seeing its last ceremony and resting sealed for centuries. And with how Egyptian family goes, 3,000 years of royal burials can accumulate quite the cast of characters, many of whom would want to protect themselves and their riches in the afterlife. Essentially, when archaeologists got down there, they had to send the most cynical, non-spiritual MFs they had. There is so much buried there that they turned up over 160 different sarcophagi and countless precious artifacts. Not complete without a few curses inscribed, of course, to prevent grave robbers or genuinely F up anyone who enters the chamber. Akhmahora's sarcophagus essentially warns that whatever's done to against his tomb, the same shall be done onto your property. It also warns that any impure trespassers will be filled with the fear of seeing seeing ghosts. Seriously, immerse yourself in excavating here though, surrounded by 160 mummies deep in the earth, curses and condemnations? Nah. How about a recent discovery that shows us there's still so much out there? The Notre Dame tombs. This month, 4 years ago. Pause. 2019 was 4 years ago. Let me sit with that for a second. Whew, okay, well, in April of 2019, many of us opened our phones or turned on our TVs to a massive shock. The Notre Dame was burning. The 12th century Gothic cathedral was saved by 500 plus firefighters, but had a major structural damage. French authorities call in archaeologists to help make sense of the damage and how to start repairs. They find something else: 2 coffins, sculptures, statues, and unseen architecture. After months of research and scans, they figure out one identity because it turns out to be written on the outside the whole time. Antoine de Pelaporte, a high priest who died in 1710 at 83. In the 300 years since he was buried, his coffin was damaged and allowed air to enter, so he was mostly bones and some bits of hair instead of a mummy. The other coffin is Mr. Unknown, and he's rocking mummy vibes. Check him out. He died between ages 25 and 40 from TB, and his pelvic bone region suggests he was a horseback rider. To be buried in the Notre, he's obviously an aristocrat, and he was buried with a flower crown, which is super cute. Both men were buried in lead sarcophagi, which was a practice reserved for the elite. Still, the 2 coffins are also quite different from each other, and this shocking find tells us the Notre is still full of secrets to uncover. And if there's 2, there's safe to assume there's more.
Number 5. Tattoos. Okay, so who was the first? We see them everywhere. I don't have any myself, but every which way you look, somebody's tatted head to toe. So who was the first one? Well, a mummy known as the Gobelin Man A pushes evidence back about 1,000 years. The oldest tattoos were once thought to belong to a South American Chinchorro mummy who had a mustache tattooed onto his face. It was initially thought that he was the oldest specimen of ink. Then, an ancient princess was found in Siberia. She holds one of the most well-preserved tattoos ever found on a body. Princess Ukok, a Scythian ruler who sadly died of breast cancer around 3,000 years ago. Her body was inked up so heavily and she was buried next to 6 horses, indicating that she was of high royalty. But in 1991, the oldest mummy ever found still holds the Guinness World Record for the oldest tats. Like 5,000 years old. Otzi the Iceman reps 61 tattoos over his entire body, mostly lines that researchers think was either medicinal or therapeutic. Several needles were tied together and the skin was pricked stick and poke style with ink made from wood smoke and milk. Mix them together, rub them all over the wounds, and voila, Travis Barker. Number 4, the Lady of Cow. Speaking of being tatted head to toe for reasons we're still unsure of, the Lady of Cow. She was discovered in 2006 by a team of Peruvian archaeologists in the El Brujo archaeological complex in northern Peru led by Regulo Franco Jordan, one of the National Cultural Institute of Peru. The mummy, which is heavily tattooed head to toe and wrapped in many layers of cloth, was found with a ton of ceremonial items, pottery, weapons, and jewelry. The remains of a second young woman were found as well, and researchers think it could have been a sacrifice, signifying this woman was a ruler of many. Modern autopsy reveals that they were in their mid-20s and died of complications due to pregnancy. They think she died somewhere around 450 BCE, and until they found her, researchers were almost certain that only men held high standing in their culture and power, and that women of this status should never have existed. Well, rewrite them, boys, because Beyonce said it. Who run the world? Girls. Boom. Right there. Evidence, sacrifice, tattoos. Come on. Number 3, killer crocs. In 1899, archaeologists funded by the University of California benefactor Phoebe A. Hearst found hundreds of crocodile mummies on an expedition to northern Egypt. 19 mummified crocodiles are part of the Egyptian collection at the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum of Anthropology at UC Berkeley. These things were a constant threat to ancient Egyptians, and there were a lot of them. Some tomb walls are even decorated head to toe with scenes that show herdsmen performing magical spells to ward off crocodiles before they cross the Nile on wooden boats. It was such a big problem every August when the Nile would flood that there were croc priests who would spend all day mummifying and offering them to the gods. Apparently, the Dutch National Museum of Antiques unwrapped and scanned a 3,000-year-old croc mummy, which were actually 50 little crocodiles positioned in a way to make it look like a giant croc. Like a croc within a croc. And not just them too. The cat-faced goddess Bastet would receive mummified cats while baboons were offered to Thoth, the god of wisdom. Animal Ritual mummification was so popular that it became a thriving industry. In one catacomb complex, Egyptologists think there could be as many as 70 million mummified animals crammed into like 30 small rooms. Different times, man, different times. Number 2, Chinchorro mummies. On the sandy dunes of the Atacama Desert, the Chilean port city of Arica, bordering Peru, was home to the Chinchorro people. In July, the United Nations Cultural Organization, UNESCO, added hundreds of well-preserved mummies to its World Heritage List. The Chinchorro mummies. First documented in 1917 by German archaeologist Max Uhl, who had found some of the preserved bodies actually on a beach. Radiocarbon dating eventually showed that the mummies were more than 7,000 years old, more than 2 millennia older than the more widely known Egyptian mummies. The earliest one, the Achaemenid, dates to 7020 BCE. They discovered their process of 3 stages. The black technique was to take the deceased person's body apart, limb by limb, treating it and then reassembling it all in like a Mr. Potato Head style. Then, the red technique, which made incisions above the shoulders to remove all internal organs and dry the body out. And finally, the mud coat. Basically, caking the body in a mixture of clay and gypsum in a last coat seal. Then they'd wrap you up. And using sticks to mold and hold a cast of a person's shape, this process was, well, this. Researchers think that Egyptians were like, oh, that's how you do it. I see what the, okay, perfect. Just gonna go over there and do that. And number 1, Sakara mummies. In 2019, just 20 miles south of Cairo on the Nile's west bank, there lays a field mixed of sand and earth that make up the ancient site of Sakara. It's the oldest building known to humans. Like old. Older than the 3 pyramids. And with that comes a new archaeological discovery. This year, archaeologists just discovered the largest loot of ancient Egypt ever. Better than Tut's tomb. 150 bronze statues, 250 coffins with mummies in them that date back 3,000 years. Sakara is Egypt's richest archaeological site. Home to the 4,700-year-old Step Pyramid, Egypt's oldest, the site was used as a burial ground. Geophysical surveys have revealed the remains of numerous temples buried under the sand, in which we have discovered only a quarter of the actual site. Millions of animal mummies like dogs, cats, cobras, and crocs, even 2 lion cubs were found mummified. The work site is 500 yards long, and the archaeologists working there have only carried out the first 100 yards of digging. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I can't wait to see like what next year holds. Like, get some more bulldozers going, you know? Sakara, Göbekli Tepe, Peru, more scans, more scans. So interesting, but also very terrifying.
Kicking off our list at number 10, Israel Cursed Tomb. Here we go, right off the hop. A secret tomb was discovered in Israel only a month ago. Now, this is the first time a tomb has been found at the UNESCO World Heritage Site in 65 years. Now, the actual cave itself was discovered only a year ago, but these smaller chambers are being found recently, as like a month ago recently. And the tomb found came along with a message. Awesome, we love those. It vows to curse anybody who would open the grave, and this message is also written in blood red, so yeah. Can we not open this one, maybe? Last time we had a black sarcophagus in Egypt, people were sticking their heads in for no reason, just to see what's up. And then, you know, a plague happened. So, number 9, Polish King Curse. Some of you may remember this, or your parents might so ask them about this at dinner. Yeah, make it weird tonight. Ask them about a Polish king curse tonight while you're eating food. Back in 1973, a team of archaeologists were jazzed when they uncovered an ancient 15th century tomb. The tomb of the Polish king at the time, King Casimir IV Jagiellon. Now, media was of course all over this discovery, as they should be. It was exciting. Now, everyone was of course making jokes about a curse. You kind of have to, right? We're all thinking about it. What if there's a curse? I don't know. Open it though, still. Some team members involved ended up dying after the discovery. It was a little odd. There were a few who said it was due to a curse, but the sudden illnesses were in fact caused by deadly fungi inside the tomb. So it still was the tomb's fault, but it wasn't a curse per se. It was breathed in, and that's what led to these researchers' untimely death. Number 8, King Tut's curse. Here we go. Since we're on the topic of illnesses or curses, let's go back 50 more years, shall we? To the legendary discovery of King Tut's tomb in 1922. This discovery is what made everyone, so paranoid when that Polish king curse came out, right? This discovery and what followed is the main reason we believe in mummy curses today. One member of the expedition, George Herbert, passed away suddenly 6 weeks after they opened King Tut's chamber. It was not toxic mold, it wasn't a curse, but rather it was a mosquito bite on the cheek. He got blood poisoning from a mosquito bite, that's all it was. I mean, I'm sure digging up bodies from the past and opening the tombs up doesn't help karma in general, but it wasn't a curse written in red. Not this time.
Number 7. John Wilkes Booth. Okay, so mummies are usually tied with Egyptian ritual and historical burial purposes, but it wasn't just them though. It's pretty common to preserve a body. John Wilkes Booth was famous for a couple of things. First off, he was one of the world's greatest actors, a true thespian, and of course, a prolific American presidential assassin. Yeah, he shot Lincoln. So apparently he escaped the manhunt, which then apparently toured the US as a mummified version of himself. Wait, what? In 1903, a drifter named David E. George locked himself in a hotel, taking his own life by ingesting a lethal amount of arsenic. According to the news report, George made a confession. I am not David E. George. I am the one who killed the best man that ever lived. I am John Wilkes Booth. The embalmed body was soon fought over, and beginning in 1937 and continuing all the way into the 1950s, the mummy was part of Jay Gould's $1 million circus. Yeah, traveling with elephants, acrobats, and high dive dog acts all around the world. According to a PBS report, the mummy itself was actually last seen in the 1970s and maybe in the hands of a private collector. Dude, people are sick. They'll buy and sell literally anything for money and clout. Like, I don't get it, dude. Just like buy and sell Pokemon cards or something, you know? Number 6, Nico Stratos. A large unknown Greco-Roman tomb was just found this year and excavated in Aswan in South Egypt. An Egyptian-Italian mission led by Patrizia Piacentini, professor of Egyptology and archaeology at the University of Milan. What makes this discovery so cool is the mummies that were discovered. This massive Romanized tomb located in the Aga Khan Mausoleum found archaeological treasures including offering tables, stone panels littered in hieroglyphics, and one large beautiful copper necklace engraved in Greek scripture with the name Nico Stratos on it. The room is overlooked by 4 burial chambers dug deep into the rock where a beautiful terracotta sarcophagus lay. The architecture alone is puzzling, let alone these mysterious high-order young adults that were mummified here. Early studies have indicated so far that the grave includes bodies from more than one family, so the mystery question: who was this Nico Stratos? Who was he? And who are these unrelated followers that followed him?
Sure. Number 5, the sitting man. Back in 2005, researchers found a Mayan tomb in Honduras dating to around 650 AD. And the body was not lying down, it was actually sitting upright in a chair. Yeah, again, I would run out of that tomb comedically fast. This man was an elite member of the Mayan Empire, it seemed. He had passed away around 650 AD, and his legs were crossed, and he was rocking jade jewelry. It was a beautiful setup. The tomb had also been positioned upright, like I said, and these types of tombs, they're quite rare to find, but the fact that this one also had somebody occupying it, still sitting up, still cross-legged with their jewelry, that's beautiful. It's double rare. Usually people come in and grave rob, but this is lovely. Would you ever walk into a tomb? Sound off below. This is a terrifying job. We have home funerals today that are kind of similar to this. I saw a post recently on Reddit where a guy, instead of an open casket, he was just sitting on the couch with his clothes on, like dead, as if he was still alive. And that's an interesting way to do a funeral. I don't know, it's kind of like ancient Egyptian, kind of terrifying. I don't know how I feel about it. Number 4, Paris catacombs. Of course we have to mention these ones, so haunting. Have you seen As Above, So Below? Yeah, I'm never visiting this place. These catacombs date back to the late 1700s and they're literally full of bones. So it's no surprise that some entrances and compartments have been blocked off, ideally, hopefully, forever. The catacombs' history is pretty twisted, it's pretty sick. When the city's cemeteries were filling up, and I mean that in a literal sense, officials began moving bodies all over the city, just trying to spread them out, just off the roads ideally, maybe, and hopefully to these abandoned mines. Eventually those started filling up, and now we don't know what to do. But the catacombs did open in 1809, so, you know what? What a fun family excursion we have now. Let's go see the whole maze of bones. All these bodies that were occupying the land, they just stacked them up. Now it's a tourist attraction. I feel sick to my stomach. They designed the catacombs with the walls of skulls to ensure that visitors would meditate on the idea of death. Lovely, let's go home, I'm terrified. Number 3, Poland double tomb. All right, here we go, 2-in-1, time to get cozy. All around the world, there have been a handful of two-person tombs discovered. Now, this is the only one that they found in Poland, so pretty impressive, have to mention it. Back in 2015, archaeologists discovered this 2,000-year-old necropolis that had been sitting there for centuries, just at peace. And then we came along with flashlights, and now we gotta open things up and lick rocks to see what year dates back to what and whose skull is whose, right? Whatever geologists do. Lo and behold, they were around 120 tombs in total. Yep, and now they're all awake. Awesome, here you go. Enjoy your resting, we're here now. Now you're a museum. They were used from the 1st century AD to the 3rd AD. Now among these 120 tombs were a 2-in-1, that stood out. Tombs that archaeologists referred to as princely. Pre-war's culture and Kujawi were in fact Celtic, so their burial process was also Celtic. Now it's a little odd to see a Stone Age Celtic necropolis in Poland, so yeah, it's like history just collapsed into one little ball, and then we found that ball and we're like, oh, what's in here? A lot of spiders, and let's get rich. Number 2, the tomb of User. Back in March 2010, the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities released this photo. It was a 6-foot tall slab of pink granite, and it was carved over 3,500 years ago. The door was found near a Karnak temple in Luxor, and it originally belonged to the chief minister of Queen Hatshepsut many moons ago. Now User was a high-ranking official for over 20 years, so in turn he got his own fancy tomb located on the west bank of the Nile. Egyptians associate the west with the land of the dead, so that's why they're all over here. The actual slab of granite though, this door, it was found originally far away from its home. It had been moved thousands of years later, and somehow it ended up in an ancient Roman era building. Yeah, never thought I'd have to say this, people, but don't steal doors from the dead. That guy for sure got cursed. Okay. And finally, number 1, the Alexandria Black Tomb. Speaking of curses, this one's pretty heavy. We found a mysterious black granite tomb in Alexandria back in 2018. You probably remember this, right? And somebody thought it was a good idea to open it up. And it was exactly what we thought it was going to be. It was bones and sludge, and it smelled so bad everyone ran away. It was horrific. When archaeologists found this massive tomb, again, untouched for over 2,000 years, on one hand, sure, that's a great find. It's a fascinating discovery. Lovely, it's a feat in itself. But us humans, we're curious cats, right? We want to pop it open, see who or what is inside. What if it's Alexander the Great? What if it's treasure that they used to pay off everybody's student loans? Hey, who knows, right? Let's open it up. Egyptian news outlet El Watan reported that the tomb was lifted just a few centimeters before every official involved at the construction site fled the scene. Yeah, it smelled that bad. They had to run away. Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, this man put his entire head in the tomb later on to show us that it is safe and not cursed. I mean, you can use your hand, you know what I mean? You can do this. You don't have to put your head in, you can just do the one hand thing. That works just as well. Maybe a foot, but straight to head dipping? Come on, Mr. Waziri, watch The Mummy, don't do this. Do you think this released a curse upon the world? Again, this was 2018, so I don't know, who knows? Sound off in the comments down below all your thoughts and concerns. Number 10, false doors. Okay, right off the bat, imagine searching for a lost Egyptian tomb, all right? Imagine you've spent years of your life dedicating to this research, and then you find a door. You find an entrance carved into the wall, and this is it. What lies beyond? It's time. You try and carefully open it with a team of archaeologists, but it won't budge because it's a fake door. It's a false door. Yeah, just a Looney Tunes door. Somebody juked you out 4,500 years ago. Gotcha. Their spirit's been waiting that long to be like, nice, idiot. All right, we can go, we're good. False doors in Egyptian tombs were quite common in ancient Egyptian times. But if we look elsewhere throughout history, we find false doors in ancient Rome, in both tombs and the interior of homes, so that ought to be confusing for any house guests back then. It's also important to note that Egyptian culture was influenced by Mesopotamian architecture, so we've had fake doors around for a while now. A lot of confusing people for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians believed that these false doors were a connection to the dead, and that spirits were able to travel here and there throughout living and death. Most false doors can be found on the West Wall because Egyptians believed the West to be the land of the dead. Number 9, the tomb of User. Back in March 2010, the Egyptian Supreme Council of Antiquities released this photo. This 6-foot tall slab of pink granite was carved over 3,500 years ago, and this door was found near Karnak Temple in Luxor, and originally it belonged to the chief minister of Queen Hatshepsut back in the 15th century. Now User was a high-ranking official and held the position of vizier for 20 years at that time, so in turn he got his own fancy tomb located on the west bank of the Nile. Remember, Egyptians associate the west with the land of the dead. That's going to come in quite a few times in this video. The actual slab of granite, this door, was found far away from its home. It had been moved thousands of years later and ended up in an ancient Roman era building. Never thought I'd have to say this, but don't steal doors from the dead. Got it? Okay, let's move on. Number 8, Alexandria Black Tomb. What if we found a tomb and then just opened it, you know? What if we found a mysterious black granite tomb in Alexandria, say back in 2018? Do you think it would be wise to just open it because we're curious? Spoiler alert, we opened it and it was exactly what we thought it was going to be. When archaeologists found this massive tomb untouched for over thousands of years, on one hand, yeah, that's a feat in itself, but us humans, we're curious creatures. We just gotta just a little peek just to see who's in there. I mean, after all, it could be Alexander the Great, right? That's the whole point of all this. Egyptian news outlet El Watan reported that the tomb was lifted only a few centimeters before every official involved at that construction site just fled the scene. They straight up just ran away. It smelled that bad. Mustafa Waziri, Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, this guy put his entire head in the tomb just to show us that it's safe. That's great. I mean, you could use your hand, maybe even a foot, I guess, just a little foot dip, but straight to the head dipping? Come on, Mr. Waziri, be smart about this. Number 7, Valley of the Kings. While March 2020 wasn't the best month of all time by any means, Egyptian officials did locate a secret vault hiding in the sands of the Valley of the Kings in Egypt. Just off the west bank of the Nile, the Valley of the Kings, as its name hints towards, is a pretty historical part of Egypt's past. Again, do we want to open this vault? Probably not, but did we? Yes. Bones and goo and history. What do you know? Surprise, surprise. Number 6, 2020 tombs. Summer 2020, nice. While most of us was stuck inside watching Netflix, more than 100 sealed coffins were found. And yes, they were occupied for the most part. Found, of course, in Sakara, Egypt, Egyptian archaeologists have never been more excited. Maybe we'll find the body of Cleopatra. Wouldn't that just be dandy? The fact that we found over 100 of these still in great shape is mind-blowing. Grave robbers have been around since ancient Egyptian days, and for all of these to be untouched for this long is honestly unbelievable. These findings date back to 712 BC, which was a period where Egypt was controlled by foreign civilizations. That's what makes this so insane. Like Persians and Greeks, they were all around at this time. The idea that we're finding mummies is great and all, but again, do we need to open all of them up? Maybe there's treasure, maybe there's bodies. Either way, it's not yours. Am I insane? Maybe I'm insane. Do we need to find Alexander the Great this badly that we're willing to disrespect this many souls in the process? Number 5. The Sitting Man. Okay, of all the tombs to find, this one would be the most horrifying. This would be so jarring to stumble across, okay? Buckle up. Back in 2005, researchers found a Mayan tomb in Honduras from the 5th century, okay? It's a long time ago. And the body inside was not lying down. It wasn't a pile of bones pointing east or west this time. Rather, it was in a chair, sitting up, like a villain from Zelda. How scary would that be? I mean, it's beautiful, but that's jarring to stumble across, you know what I mean? Whoever was the first person to look and see that, brave soul, that's all I'm saying. The body found, it appears to be an elite member of the Mayan Empire. He passed away, we think, around 650 AD. Yeah, the guy gets propped up in a chair. That's awesome. His legs were crossed and he was rocking jade jewelry. This was very royal. And the tomb itself was actually upright as well. It's common fear to be buried alive, but in this case, you'd have plenty of room. You'd be like, oh, we're good. These types of tombs are actually quite rare to find, but the fact that this one is also in great condition and there's somebody sitting cross-legged inside, double rare. Here we go. Number 4, the Terracotta Army. This is, I mean, talk about curses. Oh boy. The tomb of Emperor Qi Shi Huang, China's first emperor. Okay, in this tomb, we can find 8,000 statues. This one is quite loaded. I almost made this number 1 just out of principle. But they all have unique carvings on their face, as if to suggest these are all custom statues, all representing an individual from that long ago. All 8,000 of them. The emperor believed that after he had passed away, he would have the spirits of his enemies to face, so he wanted to be prepared even after death. The emperor decided to close the tomb before the workers even had a chance to get out. It was horrible. He was worried his enemies had found out. So there's of course lots of statues down there and a lot of dark history, just all piled into one. I would never go near this. I think the Mummy 3 is about this tomb. It didn't do so well, but yeah. Scary concept.
For my Twilight fans, you may get your kissing a vampire fantasy, seeing as there are vampire graves in Bulgaria. And it's not even like one, there's a couple. Archaeologists in Bulgaria have uncovered a 13th century corpse at Perpignan, an ancient Thracian site in the south of the country, belonging to a man in his 40s who had the misfortune of a big ol' iron rod stomped through his ribcage with the purpose of keeping the corpse from rising from the dead and disturbing the living. Oh, and his left leg had also been removed and placed next to the corpse. Insult to injury, they're making sure he can't go anywhere. At the time of the man's death, vampires were perceived as a real threat in many Eastern European and Balkan communities. People who died usually from things like taking their own lives or being fine one day and dying the next in their sleep, for example, were sometimes staked to prevent them coming back from the dead because it was an unnatural death. Amongst the Romani people, anyone who was missing a finger or had an appendage similar to those of an animal or had a horrible appearance, yikes if you're ugly, was regarded as someone who is dead. In Russia, those who talked to themselves were suspected of being a vampire in nature, so I guess I might be a vampire because that's essentially kind of what I'm doing right now, isn't it? To date, nearly 100 skeletons have been found across Bulgaria, nailed into their coffin with iron stakes or with heavy bricks and stones placed in open mouths. As I've mentioned in many of my recent demon and ghost videos, if multiple cultures report the same creature and the same method of execution for the thing, even before meeting each other, I'm inclined to maybe believe this was real. This tomb hides dirty laundry and family secrets, the New Grange and Douth tombs. It starts with a dirty story. 11th century Meath County, Ireland, a salacious folktale is passed down for 4,000 years, saying an ancient king who hailed from the tribe of the gods did some stuff with his sister on the winter solstice as part of a magical ritual to restart the sun's daily cycle and save the world from endless night. Supposedly, the deed was done in one of the country's huge burial mounds, which the locals have named the Hill of Sin. The hill is now called Douth Passage, a close neighbor and connected to the New Grange Passage. Its entries are marked with large stones, and on every winter solstice, the sun shines through and lights up the innermost burial chamber. This is supposed to be the result of the magical act that the king performed there. And nearly 1,000 years after the local legend was first written down, ancient DNA suggests a discovery that at least part of the story, naturally the grossest part, was actually true. See, the New Grange Passage is a tomb of over 150 kilometers for a well-connected family according to an ancient DNA analysis. Like a prehistoric version of the Habsburgs, this extended group of relatives seems to have ruled Ireland and maintained its connected dynasties for centuries within the family. Rulers only tend to marry their siblings in societies where the king is actually considered a god, whose perceived divinity exempts them from social custom. The winter solstice claim probably helped these rulers support their godly claim and rally effort it took to move 200,000 tons of rock to build a passage like the New Grange. That's something the pharaohs of Egypt, the kings of pre-colonial Hawaii, and the Inca emperors had in common. This cave tomb discovery is a new breed of human, Homo floresiensis. Once upon a time, on the isolated Isle of Flores, Indonesia, there lived a colony of little people. Very little people. Liang Pananing is a cave on the island of Sulawesi that is part of an island grouping called Wallachia, which ancient humans traveled through at least 50,000 years ago as a meeting point for the major admixture mating event between the Denisovans and the modern humans on their initial journey to Oceania. Here, anthropologists find 7 remains of 3-foot-tall humans with brains the size of grapefruits, suggesting these 18,000-year-old specimens weren't a quirk of ancient Homo hominin, but rather an entire species of miniature people who existed and overlapped with modern Homo sapiens. Although the odd little humans likely left no descendants and therefore no mark on human biology now, scientists say this is the first documentation of an entirely new species of Homo hominins that apparently adapted and lived for thousands of years in caves on the isolated island. As for their size, their limited habitat and its hot humid conditions may have been the key factors. They may have arrived on the island as African or Asian Homo erectus, and their generation shrank over time. Genetic size adaptation would make sense for survival. Similar factors were also at play for the pint-sized stegodon elephant, whose remains were also found in the cave with the tiny people. Evidence suggests that they hunted the miniature elephant-like creatures in groups. Imagine being the person who uncovers a tiny race of humans. Now that is a discovery, and I'm gonna be keeping up to date with this one.